The alarms screamed through the halls of the Velian High Council chamber. Ambassador Velton pressed his thin, crystalline fingers against the viewing screen, watching his world burn from orbit. The Krath warships hung in space like dark beetles, their weapons firing bright red beams into the cities below. Each strike sent thousands of his people running for underground shelters. "How long until our allies arrive?" Velton asked, his voice shaking. The communications officer, a young Velian named Sorin, checked his console. "The Centaurian coalition received our distress signal. They promised to send their fleet. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. 2 weeks." Velton felt his breathing slow. His people would be enslaved by then. The Krath didn't negotiate. They didn't show mercy. They conquered, and they took what they wanted. The Velian Republic had avoided war for 300 years by being useful, by trading, by staying small and quiet. Now their peace had ended. "Send the signal again," Velton ordered. "Broadcast on all emergency channels. Someone must hear us." Far from the dying world of Pristine Falls, Captain Tae-ho Kim sat in the command chair of the scout ship Wandering Star. His ship was small, barely large enough for a crew of 12. They had been mapping a nebula for the past 6 weeks, charting safe routes through the colorful gas clouds for future trade vessels. It was boring work, but necessary. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said the sensor officer, a woman named Jiwon. Tae-ho leaned forward. "What kind of strange?" "A distress signal. Multiple frequencies. It's desperate." Jiwon's fingers danced across her console. "It's coming from the Velian Republic. They're under attack." Tae-ho knew about the Velians. Peaceful people. Traders and artists. They made beautiful glass sculptures that sold across the galaxy. They had never hurt anyone. He stood up and walked to the communication station. "Can we help them?" asked Haewon Park, the ship's doctor. She had been reading in the corner, but now she stood, her medical bag already in her hand. "We're a scout ship," Tae-ho said slowly. "We have no weapons beyond basic defense shields. We'd be destroyed in seconds." "So we do nothing." Haewon's voice was sharp. Tae-ho closed his eyes. He thought about his training at the Earth Defense Academy. He remembered the words carved into the stone above the main entrance. "No distress call goes unanswered." It was the first rule of human space travel. It didn't matter if you were a warship or a cargo hauler. If someone called for help, you responded. "Jiwon, relay that signal to Earth Command immediately. Mark it Priority Alpha, then send a message to the Velians. Tell them help is coming." "What help?" Jiwon asked. "We can't fight a whole fleet." "No," Tae-ho agreed. "But Earth can." On Earth, Admiral Dong-ha Lee received the distress call in the middle of the night. He was a tall man with gray hair and old scars on his hands from his years as a Marine. He had fought in the border wars, had seen what happened when people didn't respond fast enough to calls for help. He read the message twice, then reached for his communicator. "This is Admiral Lee. Initiate Emergency Response Protocol 7. I want the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet ready to jump in 3 hours." His second-in-command, Commander Yoo-jin Choi, appeared on his screen. She looked tired but alert. "Admiral, the Velian Republic isn't our ally. They haven't even requested our assistance directly. The Centaurians are already responding." "In 2 weeks," Lee said. "The Velians will be dead or enslaved in 2 weeks. We can be there in 3 days." "The Galactic Council won't like this. They already think we're too aggressive." Lee smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "The Council can file a complaint. Get the fleet ready, Commander. We're going." Across Earth, the call went out. Ships that had been docked for maintenance were rushed back into service. Marines who had been on leave returned to their barracks. Fighter pilots ran to their craft. The shipyards above Earth's moon blazed with light as 12 heavy cruisers, 40 destroyers, and 3 carrier groups prepared for combat. Lieutenant Woo Jin Song checked his fighter one last time. It was a sleek craft, built for speed and maneuverability. Most alien species couldn't handle the G-forces his ship could pull. They would black out or worse. But humans had evolved on a heavy gravity world. Their bodies could take the punishment. "You ready for this?" asked his wingman, a pilot named Bomi Shin. "Always," Woo Jin said. though I wish I knew more about who we're saving. Does it matter? Bomi asked. Wu Jin thought about that. No, I guess it doesn't. On the Velian homeworld, Ambassador Veltan watched the Krath ships move into position for another bombardment. His people were dying. The underground shelters could only hold so many. Food was running low. The Krath commander, a brutal warrior named Rathkor, had sent one message: surrender or be destroyed. The Velian Council had refused. They would not become slaves. But Veltan wondered if that was the right choice. Was pride worth the lives of millions? Ambassador, Soren called out, we received a response to our distress signal. The Centaurians? Veltan felt a small spark of hope. No, sir. It's from Earth. The humans are coming. The council chamber went silent. Veltan felt his blood turn cold. Humans. The Deathworlders. The species that had evolved on a planet so harsh that most galactic citizens considered it a nightmare. They were violent, unpredictable, dangerous. The Galactic Council had only accepted them as members because refusing would have been more dangerous than agreeing. When will they arrive? Veltan asked quietly. They say 3 days. 3 days. The Centaurians wouldn't arrive for 2 weeks. The humans would be here in 3 days. Veltan didn't know if he should feel relieved or terrified. The Valians had called for help from their allies. Instead, the monsters from the Death World were coming. In space, the Krath Fleet Commander Rathkor received the same information. One of his intelligence officers reported that human ships had been detected entering the sector. Rathkor laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. Humans, the primitives who just joined the galactic community 50 years ago? How many ships? Reports say approximately 60 vessels. Commander? Rathkor waved his hand dismissively. We have 80 warships. These humans are fools to challenge the Krath Dominion. When they arrive, we will crush them and add their homeworld to our empire. Let them come. But in the darkness of space, the human fleet was already moving. They jumped through dimensions, cutting through space-time in ways that made their crews sick, but got them where they needed to go faster than any other species. Inside the flagship Indomitable, Admiral Lee stood on the bridge, watching the stars blur past. 3 days, he said quietly. We have 3 days to save an entire civilization. Commander Yu Jin stood beside him. We've done harder things. Have we? No, she admitted, but we'll do it anyway. The Admiral nodded. Behind them, the fleet followed, carrying thousands of humans toward a fight that wasn't theirs, to save people they'd never met, because someone had called for help. And humans, no matter what the galaxy thought of them, always answered the call. The space above Pristine Falls tore open like ripped fabric. Ambassador Veltan stared at the viewing screen from his underground bunker as massive portals of blue light appeared in orbit. The Velian scientists gasped. Ships were coming through, one after another, emerging from the dimensional rifts with practiced precision. Are those the Centaurians? Asked Council Member Draven, hope in his voice. The sensor operator shook his head. No, sir. The signatures are wrong. These ships are different, heavier, denser. They're made of materials I've never seen before. Veltan watched as the first ship cleared the portal. It was massive, a heavy cruiser covered in gray armor plating. Weapons bristled from its hull like thorns. Behind it came another, then another. Destroyers followed, sleek and deadly. Then the carriers, each one holding hundreds of fighter craft. Identify them, Veltan ordered, though he already knew the answer. He could feel it in his bones. Sir, they're broadcasting human identification codes. It's the Earth fleet. The bunker erupted in confused voices. Some Velians were relieved. Others were terrified. The humans had arrived in 3 days, just as they promised. But humans were Deathworlders, creatures from a planet that would kill most species within hours. They were known across the galaxy as violent, aggressive, dangerous. The Galactic Council meetings always grew tense when human representatives attended. Open a communication channel, Veltan said, his voice steadier than he felt. A screen flickered to life, showing a human face. Admiral Dongha Li looked exactly like the reports described. Hard eyes, scarred skin, gray hair cut short. He wore a dark uniform with symbols that Velton didn't recognize. "This is Admiral Dong Ha Lee of the Earth Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress signal. We're here to help." Velton didn't know what to say. He had expected the Centaurians, their longtime trading partners. Instead, he was looking at a human admiral commanding enough firepower to level a planet. We appreciate your response, Admiral. But we must ask, why did you come? We have no alliance with Earth." Lee's expression didn't change. "You sent a distress call. That's reason enough." On the Kraith flagship, Commander Rathkor was also studying the new arrivals. His tactical officer provided the ship counts: 12 heavy cruisers, 40 destroyers, 3 carrier groups. It was an impressive force, but Rathkor had 80 warships. The numbers favored him. "So the humans think to interfere," Rathkor growled. "Open a channel to their admiral." When Lee's face appeared on his screen, Rathkor bared his teeth in what his species considered a threat display. "Human Admiral, you have entered a military operation of the Krath Dominion. Leave immediately, or be destroyed." Lee didn't seem impressed by the threat. "Commander Rathkor, you are attacking a civilian population. Withdraw your forces within the next 10 minutes, or we will remove them for you." Rathkor laughed. "You dare threaten us? We have 80 warships to your 60. We have conquered 50 star systems. We crushed the Melaran Empire in less than a month. What has Earth ever done?" "We survived Earth," Lee said simply. "10 minutes, Commander. Choose wisely." The channel closed. Rathkor stared at the blank screen, then began laughing again. "Prepare for combat. We will show these primitives what happens when they challenge the Krath Dominion." Aboard the Indomitable, Commander Eugene Choi worked at her tactical station, coordinating the fleet's battle formations. She had studied Krath tactics for years. They were straightforward fighters who relied on overwhelming firepower and superior numbers. They expected enemies to fight the same way. "Admiral, the Krath are moving into attack formation," she reported. "Standard Krath tactics?" Lee asked. "Yes, sir. Broadline formation. Maximum firepower coverage." Lee nodded. "Then we use pattern Delta 7. Hit them from angles they're not expecting." Eugene smiled. Pattern Delta 7 was complicated, requiring precise timing and coordination. Most species couldn't execute it because their ships weren't built to handle the rapid acceleration changes required. But human ships were overbuilt, designed to survive Earth's violent storms and heavy gravity. What seemed impossible to others was routine for humans. Da-Un Kong, the fleet's communications specialist, was already working on another task. She had opened a channel to the Velian bunkers and was coordinating with their emergency services. "Ambassador Velton, we need you to keep your people in the shelters," Da-Un said gently. "This is going to get loud." "You're really going to fight them?" Velton asked. "The Krath have 80 ships." "We know," Da-Un replied. "Don't worry, we've handled worse odds." That was a lie. This was actually some of the worst odds the human fleet had faced in recent years. But Velton didn't need to know that. Lieutenant Wu Jin's Song sat in his fighter cockpit, running final system checks. Around him, dozens of other pilots were doing the same. The carrier bay was organized chaos as mechanics made last-minute adjustments and squadron leaders barked orders. "All squadrons, this is flight control," came the voice over his headset. "You are clear for launch in 2 minutes. Remember your training. These Krath ships are tough, but they're built for stability, not maneuverability. Use that against them." Wu Jin's wingman, Bomi, chimed in on their private channel. "You scared?" "Terrified," Wu Jin admitted. "You?" "Same. But we've got people counting on us down there. People who don't even know us." "Does that matter?" Wu Jin thought about that as his fighter's engines roared to life. "No, it doesn't." The 10 minutes passed quickly. The Krath fleet didn't withdraw. Instead, they advanced, their weapons charging with visible energy. Rathkor sent one final message to the humans. "You had your chance. Now you die." Admiral Lee's response was simple. "All ships, weapons free. Protect the civilians. Show them what humanity stands for." The space above Pristine Falls exploded into violence. The Krath fleet fired first, sending massive energy beams toward the human ships. But the human vessels were already moving, breaking formation in ways that seemed random but were actually precisely calculated. The beams struck empty space where the ships had been seconds before. Commander Yujin called out coordinates, and 17 human destroyers fired missiles simultaneously from different angles. The missiles weren't aimed at the Krath ships directly. Instead, they detonated in a pattern that created a wall of shrapnel and energy, forcing the Krath formation to break apart. Pattern Delta 7, Phase 2, Lee ordered. The human heavy cruisers accelerated forward, their engines pushing them at speeds that would have injured crews from lighter gravity worlds. They punched through the disrupted Krath formation, firing at close range. The Krath shields held, but barely. From his bunker, Ambassador Velton watched the battle unfold. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The Krath fought with disciplined formations and overwhelming firepower. The humans fought like a pack of predators, constantly moving, attacking from unexpected angles, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted effectively. "They're insane," whispered Council Member Draven. "Those maneuvers should tear their ships apart." But the ships held together. They were built for this, designed by engineers who understood that sometimes survival meant being able to take a beating and keep fighting. That was the human way. That was the Deathworlder way. Captain Tae-ho Kim, still in his small scout ship at the edge of the battle, watched with professional appreciation. His ship, the Wandering Star, had no place in this fight, but he could provide reconnaissance, slipping through the chaos to give the fleet information about Krath positions and movements. "Captain," called his sensor officer Ji-won, "3 Krath destroyers are trying to flank the human carriers." Tae-ho immediately transmitted the information to the fleet. Within seconds, a squadron of human fighters led by Woo Jin-song intercepted the destroyers, forcing them back into the main battle. The Krath were learning that numbers alone wouldn't win this fight. They were facing an enemy that refused to fight fair, that used tactics they'd never encountered, that seemed to thrive in the chaos of battle. They were fighting humans, and humans had learned to fight by surviving the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy. The battle raged on, and the galaxy was watching. Lieutenant Woo Jin-song's fighters screamed through space at speeds that made his teeth hurt. Behind him, 3 Krath interceptors were trying to match his movements. They couldn't. His ship pulled a turn that generated 8 times Earth's gravity. The Krath pilots, evolved on a gentler world, would have blacked out from such a maneuver. Woo Jin just gritted his teeth and kept flying. "Target lock," shouted Bomi over the squadron channel. Her fighter dove from above, missiles streaking toward the Krath ships. 2 of them exploded in brilliant flashes. The third tried to evade, but flew directly into Woo Jin's firing solution. He pressed the trigger, and the Krath ship came apart in a shower of debris. "Nice flying," Woo Jin said. "You too, but we've got bigger problems." She was right. The main Krath battle line was reforming, trying to create the kind of organized formation their doctrine demanded. Admiral Lee wasn't going to give them that chance. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Commander Eugene Choi studied the tactical display. The Krath had superior numbers, but they were fighting a defensive battle now, trying to maintain formation instead of pressing their advantage. That was exactly what she wanted. "Admiral, the Krath flagship is moving to the center of their formation," she reported. Lee nodded. "They're trying to coordinate their fleet from a protected position. Logical, also predictable. Shall I order the Phoenix Gambit?" Lee hesitated. The Phoenix Gambit was dangerous. It required a small group of ships to punch through the enemy formation and strike at the command vessel, accepting heavy damage to disrupt enemy coordination. It was the kind of tactic that other species considered wasteful. But humans understood something that many others didn't. Sometimes you had to be willing to take risks to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "Execute it," Lee ordered, "but tell Captain So Young to be careful. I want her and her crew back alive." Captain So Young Han commanded the Marine assault ship Typhoon. When the order came through, she smiled. This was what her ship was built for. The Typhoon was heavily armored but lightly armed, designed to get Marines close to enemy vessels and board them. It wasn't meant to survive in a straight firefight. It was meant to do something so crazy that the enemy wouldn't expect it. "All hands, battle stations," So Young announced over the shipwide channel. "We're going into the mouth of the dragon. Hold tight." The typhoon accelerated, 6 destroyers forming a protective screen around it. They dove toward the Krath formation, taking fire from dozens of ships. The shields flared as energy beams struck them. Warning alarms blared. But the ship held together, its overbuilt human engineering absorbing punishment that would have destroyed most vessels. "Damage report," So Young called out. "Shields at 40%. Hull integrity holding. Engine 3 is offline, but we can compensate. Keep us moving." In the fighter squadrons, Woojin saw what the typhoon was doing and understood immediately. "All fighters, form up on the typhoon. We're running interference." Dozens of human fighters swarmed around the assault ship, becoming a living shield. They fired at any Krath ship that tried to target the typhoon, forcing the enemy to choose between shooting at small, fast fighters or the heavily armored assault ship. It was a terrible choice, and the Krath hesitated. That hesitation cost them. The typhoon broke through their formation and pulled alongside a Krath heavy cruiser. Boarding pods launched from its sides, each one carrying a squad of human marines. Master Sergeant Jinsu Quan felt his pod slam into the Krath ship's hull. The cutting torch activated automatically, burning through the alien metal. Warning lights flashed as the atmosphere vented, but his suit kept him safe. The torch finished its work, and the pod's door blew inward. "Go, go, go!" Jinsu shouted, leading his marines into the Krath ship. They emerged into a corridor filled with Krath warriors. The aliens were bigger than humans, stronger, with thick armor plating on their bodies. They roared challenges and charged forward with weapons raised. Jinsu's marines opened fire. The humans were smaller, but they were faster, and they had trained for this. Every human child learned about Earth's history, about how their ancestors had survived by being smarter and more adaptable than stronger predators. Those lessons applied in space just as much as they had on ancient Earth. Corporal Unji Nam moved with practiced efficiency, placing explosive charges on key structural points. "Charges set. 3 minutes." "Fall back," Jinsu ordered. The Marines retreated to their boarding pod, fighting every step of the way. The Krath warriors pressed forward, but human weapons found their weak points. The Marines made it back just as Unji's charges detonated. The explosions tore through the Krath ship's weapon systems, rendering an entire heavy cruiser combat ineffective. "One down," So Young said aboard the Typhoon. "Find me another target." While the battle raged in space, Dr. Haewon Park was dealing with a different kind of crisis. Her medical ship, the Mercy, had moved into orbit near the Velian planet. Shuttles were arriving carrying wounded Velian civilians who had been injured in the Krath bombardments. "Doctor, we have incoming," called her assistant. 15 wounded, various injuries. Haewon moved to the receiving bay. When the Velians saw her, some of them recoiled in fear. She understood. To them, humans looked like predators. Forward-facing eyes, visible teeth, strong hands. But she spoke softly, moving slowly so as not to frighten them further. "You're safe now," she said in carefully practiced Velian. "We're here to help." One Velian, a child with crystalline skin cracked from weapon burns, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you going to eat me?" Haewon felt her heart break a little. "No, sweetheart. I'm going to make you better." She worked through the night, treating burns, setting broken bones, administering medicine. Her human hands, evolved for crafting tools and hunting, were surprisingly gentle as they bandaged wounds and offered comfort. The Velians watched in confusion as this creature from a death world, this supposed monster, treated them with more care than some of their own doctors had shown. "I don't understand," said one elderly Velian. "The galaxy says humans are dangerous." Haewon looked up from the patient she was treating. "We are dangerous, but only to those who hurt the innocent. To everyone else, we're just people trying to help." Back in space, the battle was turning. The Krath had lost 15 ships, and many others were damaged. The human fleet had lost 3 destroyers and taken heavy damage across multiple vessels, but they were still fighting. More importantly, they were winning. Commander Rathkor stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His fleet should have crushed these humans through sheer numbers, but every time he tried to organize his ships, the humans broke his formation. Every time he sent ships to attack, human fighters appeared from nowhere to intercept them. It was like fighting shadows. All ships, focus fire on their flagship, Rathkor ordered. If he could kill their admiral, maybe their coordination would collapse. 20 Krath ships turned their weapons toward the Indomitable. Energy beams converged on the human flagship from multiple angles. The shields flared white-hot, overloading and failing. The beams struck the armor directly, burning through in several places. "Shields down," called the damage control officer. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, casualties reported." Admiral Lee gripped his command chair as the ship shook. "Status? We can still fight, sir." "Then we fight. Return fire." The Indomitable's main weapons fired back, but Lee knew they were in trouble. His flagship was tough, but it couldn't take that kind of concentrated firepower for long. Then Commander Yu Jin spoke up, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Admiral, the Krath have made a mistake. They pulled those 20 ships out of formation to attack us. That means their rear flank is exposed." Lee saw it immediately. The Krath had abandoned their disciplined formation to focus on killing him. It was emotional, not tactical, and it had created an opening. "All carriers, launch all fighters. Target the Krath rear positions. Show them what happens when they lose discipline." The space behind the Krath fleet suddenly filled with human fighters. Wu Jin led his squadron in, firing at the exposed engines and weapon systems of Krath ships that had turned to attack the Indomitable. Explosions blossomed across the Krath formation. Rathkor realized his error too late. He had let anger cloud his judgment, had abandoned sound tactics for the emotional satisfaction of trying to kill the human admiral. Now his fleet was in chaos, being torn apart from behind while his forward ships were locked in combat with the human battle line. "Withdraw the rear ships. Reform the line," Rathkor ordered. But it was too late. The humans had momentum now. They pressed their advantage, and the Krath fleet began to break apart. On Pristine Falls, Ambassador Velton watched the battle turn in humanity's favor. Around him, the Velian Council stood in stunned silence. These humans, these supposed barbarians from a death world, were not only fighting to save a people they'd never met, they were winning. "Why?" Velton whispered. "Why would they risk so much for us?" On the Mercy, Dr. Haywan heard the question from a Velian patient and gave the same answer Admiral Lee would have given. "Because you asked for help, and humans don't ignore calls for help. We know what it's like to need saving." The Krath fleet was bleeding. 23 ships destroyed, another dozen badly damaged and limping toward the rear of the formation. Commander Rathkor's flagship, the Dominator, sat at the center of a shrinking defensive sphere. Around it, the remaining Krath vessels fought desperately, but discipline was crumbling. The humans had done the impossible. They had broken the supposedly unbreakable Krath war machine. Admiral Lee studied the tactical display on the Indomitable's bridge. His flagship was wounded, venting atmosphere from 3 decks, but still functional. Around him, his crew worked with calm efficiency, putting out fires and rerouting power. This was what humans did best. They endured. "Commander Yu Jin, analysis," Lee said. Yu Jin highlighted the Krath flagship on the display. "The Dominator is heavily defended but isolated. If we take it out, the rest of their fleet will lose coordination. They'll either surrender or scatter." "Recommendations?" "We do what we do best, Admiral. We go in close and personal." Lee nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. The Krath expected their enemies to fight at range, using missiles and energy weapons from safe distances. They didn't expect anyone to be crazy enough to board a flagship in the middle of a battle. But humans had learned warfare from predators on a world that wanted them dead. Safe wasn't in their vocabulary. "Contact Captain So-Young. Tell her it's time for the hammer strike." On the marine assault ship Typhoon, Captain So-Young Han received the orders and felt her pulse quicken. The hammer strike was the most dangerous boarding operation in human military doctrine. It required landing Marines directly on an enemy flagship's bridge section, cutting through the hull and securing the command center while the battle still raged. Most species thought it was suicide. Humans thought it was Tuesday. All Marine teams, report to boarding pods, So Young announced. We're taking the Dominator. Master Sergeant Jin-Soo Kwon checked his powered armor one final time. The suit was built to withstand incredible punishment, reinforced with materials that could survive Earth's deepest oceans or highest mountains. It made him stronger, faster, and nearly indestructible. He looked at his team. 20 Marines, all volunteers, all ready to do something insane. Remember your training, Jin-Soo said. The Krath are bigger and stronger than us, but we're smarter, faster, and we've fought worse things than them. Every human alive is descended from people who survived Earth. That means we're descended from survivors. Let's show them what that means. The Marines loaded into their pods. Corporal Yoon-ji Nam carried extra explosives, enough to blow through reinforced doors or collapse entire corridors if needed. Next to her, Private Young-ho checked his weapon, a heavy rifle designed to punch through armor. Dr. Yuna, a xenobiologist who had been attached to the mission, spoke over their helmet channels. Remember, the Krath have a weak point at the base of their neck, where the armor plates don't quite meet. If you need to fight hand-to-hand, that's your target. Also, their command center uses a high-oxygen atmosphere. Be careful with explosives. Thanks, Doc, Jin-Soo replied. Try not to worry too much. You're about to fly in a metal box into an enemy warship's hull while under fire, Yuna said dryly. I'm going to worry. The Typhoon accelerated toward the Dominator, flanked by 6 destroyers and 3 squadrons of fighters. The Krath defenders opened fire immediately, filling space with energy beams and missiles. The human ships twisted and turned, their pilots pulling maneuvers that would have killed crews from lighter gravity worlds. Lieutenant Wu Jin Song led his fighter squadron directly into the defensive fire, drawing attention away from the Typhoon. His fighter took a glancing hit that melted part of his wing, but the ship held together. Beside him, Bomi destroyed a Krath interceptor with a perfectly placed shot. Stay alive, Marine friends, Wu Jin said over the tactical channel. We're clearing you a path. The Typhoon's engines roared as it made its final approach. Defensive turrets on the Dominator swiveled to target it, but human fighters were already destroying those turrets. The assault ship slammed against the Krath flagship's hull, magnetic clamps locking it in place. Pods away, So Young ordered. 20 boarding pods launched from the Typhoon, each one carrying a Marine team. They struck the Dominator's hull and immediately began cutting through. Master Sergeant Jin-Soo felt his pod shake as the cutting torch worked. Then the floor beneath him gave way, and he dropped into the enemy ship. He landed in a corridor filled with Krath warriors. They were massive creatures, each one nearly 8 feet tall with thick armor, plating covering their bodies. They roared in challenge and charged forward, weapons raised. Jin-Soo's Marines opened fire. The powered armor gave them strength, but more importantly, it gave them speed. They moved like predators, like the hunters their ancestors had been on ancient Earth. The Krath were strong, but they were used to fighting enemies who backed away from close combat. Humans ran toward it. Private Young-ho took a hit from a Krath energy weapon, the beam scorching his armor, but not penetrating it. He didn't slow down. He closed the distance, dodged a massive fist, and drove his combat knife into the weak point at the Krath's neck. The warrior fell, and Young-ho moved to the next target. Corporal Yoon-ji threw a flashbang grenade, the explosion of light and sound disorienting the Krath warriors. In the confusion, the Marines advanced, fighting with a combination of firepower and hand-to-hand combat that the Krath had never encountered before. "Bridge is 3 decks up," Jin-Soo shouted. "Move!" They fought their way through the ship, leaving disabled Krath warriors in their wake. Every corridor was a battle. Every room had to be cleared. But the Marines kept moving, kept pushing forward because that was what humans did. They endured. They persisted. They refused to quit. On the Dominator's bridge, Commander Rathkor received reports of boarders and couldn't believe it. Humans were inside his flagship, fighting their way toward him. It was insane. It was tactically unsound. It was working. "Send all security teams to intercept them," Rathkor ordered. "Kill these humans." But the security teams found that killing humans was harder than expected. The Marines fought with a ferocity that came from millions of years of evolution on a planet that had tried to kill them every single day. They had learned to survive against predators larger and stronger than themselves. The Krath were big, but Earth had been bigger. Jinsu's team reached the bridge level. Between them and the command center was a reinforced door and 20 Krath elite guards. The guards were the biggest warriors Wrathcore had, veterans of a dozen conquests. Yunji, Jinsu said, how much explosive do you have left? Enough, she replied, already setting charges. Good. Everyone behind cover. This is going to be loud. The explosion tore the door from its hinges and sent the Krath guards flying. Before they could recover, the Marines rushed through the smoke, firing as they went. It was brutal, close-quarters fighting. Jinsu took a hit that cracked one of his armor plates. Young-ho was knocked down by a Krath fist, but got back up and kept fighting. Yoon-ji ran out of ammunition and switched to her combat knife. The battle lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, all 20 Krath guards were down, and the Marines were still standing, though barely. Bridge door now, Jinsu ordered. They blew through the final door and stormed the Dominator's bridge. Commander Wrathcore stood at the center, surrounded by his command staff. He was the largest Krath Jinsu had ever seen, covered in battle scars and wearing ceremonial armor. You dare, Wrathcore roared. You dare board my ship? Jinsu raised his weapon. Commander Wrathcore, you are ordered to surrender your vessel and cease hostilities. Your fleet is defeated. Wrathcore laughed. I will never surrender to humans. You are children playing at war. We're the children who survived Earth, Jinsu replied. That makes us the most dangerous children in the galaxy. Last chance, Commander. Surrender. Wrathcore roared and charged. He was fast for his size and incredibly strong, but Jinsu had been trained by instructors who understood that humans couldn't afford to fight fair. He dodged the first swing, let the Krath's momentum carry him past, and struck at the weak point Dr. Yuna had identified. The Krath commander fell to his knees, then collapsed. Jinsu's Marines secured the bridge, locking down the command systems. This is Master Sergeant Quan to Admiral Lee. The Dominator is ours. The enemy commander is captured. On the Indomitable's bridge, Admiral Lee allowed himself a small smile. Outstanding work, Sergeant. Commander Yujin, broadcast surrender terms to the remaining Krath vessels. The message went out across all frequencies. The Krath flagship had fallen, their commander was captured, and continued resistance was futile. One by one, the remaining Krath ships powered down their weapons. The battle was over. The humans had won. On Pristine Falls, Ambassador Velton watched the Krath fleet go silent. Around him, the Velian Council erupted in cheers. They had been saved, rescued by the very beings the galaxy had taught them to fear. The Deathworlders had come when their allies hadn't, had fought a superior force, and had won. Velton opened a channel to the Indomitable. When Admiral Lee's face appeared, the ambassador didn't know what to say. Lee spoke first. Ambassador, your planet is secure. The Krath will not trouble you again. Admiral, we owe you our lives. How can we ever repay you? Lee shook his head. You don't owe us anything. You sent out a call for help. We answered. That's what good people do. The morning sun rose over Pristine Falls for the first time in a week, without the shadow of Krath warships blocking its light. In the underground shelters, Velian families emerged cautiously, looking up at a sky that was finally clear. Above them, human ships maintained orbit, standing guard while the Velians began to rebuild. In the Indomitable's medical bay, Dr. Haywan Park moved between beds where wounded Marines rested. The casualties had been heavy. 847 dead, over 2,000 wounded. Each loss weighed on her heart, but she kept working because that was what doctors did. You saved who you could, mourned who you couldn't, and kept going. How are you feeling, Young-ho? She asked the young private who had taken a direct hit during the flagship assault. Like I got hit by a Krath fist, he said with a weak smile. Which I did, but I'm alive, Doc. That's what matters. Haywan checked his readings. The armor had saved his life, but he would be recovering for weeks. You did good up there. You saved a lot of people. People we've never met, Young-ho said quietly. Why do we do this, Doc? Risk our lives for strangers? Hae-won had heard this question before, usually from young soldiers after their first real battle. She sat down beside his bed. Do you know Earth's history? Really know it? Some of it. Then you know that for most of our existence, humans barely survived. We were prey animals on a planet filled with things that wanted to eat us. We should have gone extinct 1,000 times over, but we didn't. You know why? Young-ho shook his head. Because we learned to help each other. A human alone on ancient Earth was dead. But humans together could survive anything. We became the most cooperative species on the planet. We learned that when someone calls for help, you answer, because someday you might be the one calling. That instinct is why we're here, why we answered the Velian distress call. It's who we are. On the planet below, Ambassador Veltan walked through the damaged streets of his capital city. Buildings were collapsed, infrastructure was destroyed, but his people were alive. They were free, and they owed it all to the humans. A group of Velian children approached him, curious and brave. Ambassador, is it true? The humans fought the Krath for us? Yes, Veltan said. It's true. But the teachers said humans are dangerous, that they come from a death world and we should be afraid of them. Veltan looked at the children and realized he had a choice. He could continue teaching fear, or he could teach truth. Humans are dangerous, he said carefully, but only to those who hurt others. To everyone else, they're the best friends you could ask for. On the captured Krath flagship, Commander Rathkor sat in a holding cell, his pride as broken as his fleet. He had underestimated the humans, dismissed them as primitives, and paid the price. When Admiral Lee came to speak with him, Rathkor found he had no words. You're wondering how we won, Lee said, sitting across from the Krath commander. Your numbers were inferior. Your technology is less advanced than ours. By all logic, we should have crushed you. Lee nodded. You're right about the technology. Most galactic species are more advanced than us. But you made 3 mistakes, Commander. What mistakes? First, you assumed that advanced technology makes you superior. But humans learned long ago that the best weapon isn't the newest one. It's the one wielded by someone who refuses to quit. Second, you thought fighting was about strength. But fighting is about will. The Krath are stronger than humans, but we wanted to win more than you did. And the third mistake? Rathkor asked. You thought we were fighting for ourselves. We weren't. We were fighting for the Velians. That's different. When you fight for yourself, you can choose to retreat, to preserve your life. When you fight for someone else, especially someone weaker who's counting on you, retreat isn't an option. You endure anything, sacrifice anything, because they have no one else. Rathkor was silent for a long moment. I have conquered 50 worlds. I have never met an enemy like you. That's because most enemies you've faced could afford to lose, Lee said. But humans know what it's like to be the prey, to be the weak ones fighting for survival. We know that feeling of desperation when you call for help and no one comes. That's why we answered the Velians. We won't let anyone else feel that alone. 3 days after the battle, the Centaurian coalition fleet finally arrived. Their ships emerged from their jump points to find the battle already over, the Krath defeated, and humans helping the Velians rebuild. The coalition admiral, a dignified being named Sorlan, opened communications with Admiral Lee. It appears we're late, Sorlan said, embarrassment clear in his voice. The Velians needed help immediately, Lee replied simply. We were closer. Your fleet took significant casualties. Our intelligence suggests you lost nearly 1,000 personnel. 847, Lee corrected. We count everyone. Sorlan was quiet for a moment. The Galactic Council will want to speak with you about this incident. There will be questions about why Earth sent a military fleet into a conflict without authorization. We responded to a distress call, Lee said. I wasn't aware we needed authorization to help people in danger. The Council worries about human aggression. They fear you're too quick to resort to violence. Lee's expression hardened. Tell the council this. We will always respond to distress calls. Always. If they have a problem with that, they can file a complaint after the people are safe. But we won't change who we are to make politicians comfortable. Back on Earth, the news of the battle spread quickly. The human public reacted with their typical mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in their military for saving the Velians. Sadness for the nearly 1,000 lives lost. Memorial services were held, and the names of the fallen were carved into stone monuments. But something else happened too. Across the galaxy, other species began to reconsider their opinions about humans. They had called them dangerous Deathworlders, primitive barbarians too violent for civilized society. But the Velians told a different story. They spoke of humans who risked everything to save strangers, who fought with incredible ferocity but showed incredible compassion. Ambassador Velton addressed the Galactic Council personally, making an impassioned speech about the humans who had saved his people. We called for help, and our allies took 2 weeks to respond. The humans, who owed us nothing, arrived in 3 days. They fought a superior force and won. They lost nearly 1,000 of their own to save millions of ours. And when the battle was over, they asked for nothing in return. If this is what the Council calls dangerous, then I pray for more danger in the galaxy. The speech was broadcast across every civilized world. Public opinion began to shift. Humans were still seen as formidable, still respected and feared for their martial prowess. But now they were also seen as something else: protectors, guardians, the people you wanted on your side when danger came. On Pristine Falls, construction had begun on a monument in the capital city. It was a simple design, a tall obelisk made of the same crystalline material as Velian skin, but reinforced with human steel. At its base were carved the names of every human who had died defending the planet. Above those names, a single line of text in both Velian and human languages. The Deathworlders came when called. Dr. Haywan stood before the monument on the day it was unveiled. Beside her stood Master Sergeant Jinsu, Captain So Young, Lieutenant Wu Jin, and dozens of other human personnel. Thousands of Velians gathered to pay their respects. They'll remember this, Captain Tejo said quietly, his scout ship having remained in orbit throughout the reconstruction efforts. Not just the Velians, everyone will remember. Is that good or bad? Asked Commander Yujin. Both, Admiral Lee replied. Some will see humans as heroes, others will see us as a threat. But they'll all know one truth: if you call for help, humans will answer. That evening, as the human fleet prepared to depart, Ambassador Velton made one final transmission to Admiral Lee. Admiral, my people wish to establish formal relations with Earth. We want to be your allies, your friends. We owe you everything. Lee shook his head. You don't owe us anything, Ambassador, but we would be honored to call you friends. The galaxy is a dangerous place. Good people need to stand together. One question, Admiral. Your people maintain rapid response fleets like this one all across human space. The Council says it's economically wasteful. Why do you do it? Lee was quiet for a moment, thinking about Earth's history. About all the times humans had called for help and no one had come. About the lessons learned through millions of years of being prey. About the promise humans had made to themselves: never again. Because the worst sound in the universe, Lee said slowly, is a distress call that goes unanswered. We know what that silence means. We've lived it. So we promised ourselves we would never let anyone else experience it, no matter the cost, no matter the distance. If someone calls for help, humans will answer. Even for strangers? Especially for strangers, Lee said. Because friends are just strangers you haven't helped yet. The human fleet departed the next morning, leaving behind a grateful population and a galaxy that would never quite see them the same way again. The Velians had learned that the beings they feared were actually their salvation. And the rest of the galaxy had learned something important about the Deathworlders from Earth. They were dangerous. They were fierce. They were relentless in battle. But they were also honorable, compassionate, and utterly committed to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. They had evolved on the most dangerous planet in known space, and that harsh upbringing had made them into exactly what the galaxy needed: Warriors who fought not for conquest, but for justice. Not for glory, but for the simple principle that when someone calls for help, you answer. And that promise, more than any weapon or warship, was what made humanity truly powerful. The Deathworlders had come when called, and they always would.